So just wanted to thank everybody for coming, and I want to pass everything off to the fine students in the Sociology Club who will get things going and MC our event for tonight.
Sorry, I'm terribly short. Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming. The Sociology Club welcomes you. First off, we would like to say a special thanks to our sponsors, which is the Orlando Gehring Endowment and the College of Arts and Sciences Dean's Opportunity Fund. This topic that we're talking about today is very important. This is an issue that persists in the United States. And quite frankly, not enough people are talking about this, and there's not enough attention in the media on this topic either. So we're super grateful that those who have showed up are here, and those who will be watching this tomorrow and the recordings later. Also, thank you very much, because this is super, super, super important to talk about. Today, we have a couple different speakers. We have Liz Ramirez. I just pulled some quick information from the Innocence Project website. So Liz Ramirez, in March 1995, 20-year-old Elizabeth Ramirez and 3 of her friends were indicted on charges of sexually molesting Ramirez's 7-year-old and 9-year-old nieces in San Antonio, Texas. They were convicted in 1998 and exonerated in 2016. Our second speaker tonight, Carlos Sanchez, spent nearly 25 years, more than half of his life, in a prison for murder that he and his attorneys maintain he did not commit before he was granted parole in January 2017 and released in May 2017. The Innocence Project continues to fight to secure his exoneration while Sanchez is adjusting to life on the outside. Tomorrow night, we will also be continuing this speaker series. It's going to be from 4 to 6:30 p.m. in Patterson Hall, room 117. And we will have Robert Du Bois, Keith Harward, and Nigel. I'm so sorry, Nigel. Quirez, I'm so sorry. We are also allowing questions from the public, so you can scan that QR code. We will also be having a Sociology Club member, Brett. They will be handing out the microphone for any questions as well. But again, thank you so much for showing up to talk about such an important topic, and we will get going.
Okay, Liz, we have you up first.
Okay.
Sorry, just quick. So I have the podium. So I just want to say, like, you are one of the subjects of a documentary called Southwest of Salem that talks about you as being one of your case as being one of the last gasps of the satanic ritual abuse panic. Sorry, guys, I just said it, but like, yeah, would you just say more about that?
Yes. Can you hear me clearly?
Yeah.
Yeah. So in 1997, in February, I was convicted of aggravated sexual assault. And it was me and 3 other friends. Of course, because they had me as a ringleader, they took me to trial first, and the other 3 women a year later. And so in 97, I was convicted for aggravated sexual assault to a child. Because I was gay, they felt that me and my friends had sacrificed my nieces, which at the time were 7 and 9, saying that we, in court, the prosecutors painted this big picture that because we were gay, we had to sacrifice my nieces to initiate, I guess, this gay lifestyle or lesbianism that they say, and painted the picture of that's what gay people do. And it's not. During the time the Satanic Panic had started back in like 1985, the first case we had was Bernard Barron. I don't know if any of you know who he is, but he was working at a daycare. And he was convicted in, I believe it was in 85. And then I don't know if you guys heard of the Dan and Fran case. They were the case right before ours that were also for the Satanic Panic. Because at this time it was like a daycare kind of panic where they're saying that because Bernard was gay, because we were gay, we sacrificed children, for our lifestyle. So during this time, our case was the last case that came up because we were 4 women. And they used, because of the lifestyle, that it was the panic and we were the last gasp of it. And so that's why they have it recorded at that. They made such a big deal about our lifestyle that our conviction, they had us convicted before we even went to trial.
Do you feel like what happened to you, or like the phenomenon of the satanic panic and the intersection of that with like homophobia, do you think that could happen again today, or do you see things that are like that?
Oh no, definitely. I feel that it can still happen today. You know, there's I know that a lot of like gay marriage has come about. People can get married, they can be registered, they have their marriage license. I know that you can get health insurance, you know, you have a partner. And I know that, you know, they had a lot of reform, you know, being gay and married and things like that. But I believe that even now, you still have a lot of states that are very conservative and still there's still homophobia everywhere. You know, just because, you know, we all have a little bit of rights, I believe that still, you know, the system still has a lot of work to do. So I believe that today, as of today, it could still happen. We still have people that, you know, because they're going through a divorce or because two women or 2 men are trying to adopt children, you know, we have to be very careful with that, because a lot of times society will, just because they're angry that we're able to adopt a child, and you have a heterosexual couple that's trying to adopt a child and they can't, but you have 2 gay men and 2 gay women that are able to raise a child, of course, it becomes an issue. And a lot of times these are where some of these issues arise, and it can still happen in the court systems.
Could you talk a little bit about like the exoneration process?
Yes.
For you? Yeah.
So the exoneration process is a long process. You know, to me, I feel like it's so easy to convict someone. You know, you go through that process and you're just, okay, they arrest you, you know, they have all this, they charge you with it, and then you go to trial and then it's done. Well, for the exoneration, of course, you have to prove your innocence. And ours started in 2010. And from 2010 until 2018, I believe, is when we got our expungement papers. And so during this whole time, of course, with the conviction, you know, we have an aggravated sexual assault charge. And so we're out on bond. Your charge is still following you. So when you go through a background check for a job or for even a living situation, if you want to get an apartment, the charges are still showing up on your background check. So until the process is done where it's expunged and the charges are no longer tied to your name, that's the only time where, you know, you're totally cleared. So during the 2010 and 2018, you're still under the system's thumb, because no matter what, when they pull up your name, you still have everything connected to you. So it's a long process.
Was there anything while you were incarcerated that helped keep your spirits up?
For myself, and I think for a lot of us that are incarcerated for a long period of time, church is a big thing. I believe that my faith in God is what carried me through. A lot of times I had a job there. Of course, in Texas, we don't get paid, but I worked at a print shop, and I went in at 5 a.m. until 3:30 in the afternoon. And for me, that was kind of like my getaway from prison, where I'm able to work and kind of learn new trades. And I knew that I was going to be, you know, I was fighting the case, but I knew I was going to be 62 years old before I was going to be able to complete my whole 37 and a half years. And so with that being said, I continued to try to teach myself different trades, because I knew I was going to have to come home and make money, because I wasn't going to, I didn't have anything. I lost everything, when I went to prison. And so while I was in there, my faith in God is what carried me through. And every day I prayed, for the truth to come out. And I wrote letters and I try to reach out for, to other people to try to help. And finally, going through there's a writerprisoners.com where you can kind of put ads up to kind of, find pen pals to write. And so I had done that. And I found a gentleman that was in Canada that worked at a university and was interested in the case. And he helped us out, with that correspondence and everything. It started off with, how, tell me a little bit about your case. And so, I start off with, there's not much to say, I'm innocent. And it kind of went from there. So a lot of times, writing, sending letters out to try to get help that I needed, the job that I had at the print shop, and also, going to church is what kept me positive. And it helped me to stay in the right frame of mind where I didn't get caught up in the system, because it's easy. It's a whole different way of life. And you have to survive in there. The way of living in there is totally different. And someone that wasn't exposed to anything, that had never been in trouble, I was young, 20 years old, and then to go into prison and see all the things I saw, you kind of learn the way of life in there to survive. And so a lot of times, keeping my faith in God and staying focused on what my main purpose was, to come home to my son and my family and keep me out of fighting and just causing issues and mishap in the prison. I believe that's what kept me straightforward.
So like a lot of our, students here and like people in the sociology club, like we were really not around during the Satanic Panic at all. So we've heard stories, but like we don't necessarily have a good sense of what it was like. Do you have, what are your, memories of the Satanic Panic from like the early 90s? Do you know?
You want to give you an example, kind of?
Yeah.
So so for me, during the time, I didn't know a whole lot either. I didn't even know it was going on until my case. When I got incarcerated, then I learned more about the Bernard Barron case, the Fran and her husband case. But there was a lot of homophobia out. I remember when I used to be able to go out to the clubs, and there was a lot of gay bashing. People didn't show their affection out in public like we do today. Today you go to the movies, you see people, holding hands, you see people, exchanging kisses. During my time, when I came out, we didn't do any of that. We did not at all show any kind of affection in public. And then when you did, you had to be careful because you never knew who saw you. And you didn't know what they thought about gay people or what they're capable of doing. So you're always living in fear, and nobody wanted to be able to come out and say, because, we're so conservative in San Antonio, and then being Hispanic, Catholic kind of growing up, it's against the Bible, it's this. And so it's just, everything was kind of against you. But during the 90s, that's when they were saying, okay, because you're homophobic, because you're gay, you can hurt children. And that's not true. Just because you choose to love someone of the same sex doesn't mean that, you're going to hurt children, or that, you're capable of doing anything like that. But that's where their frame of mind was at that point and at that time.
Yeah, go ahead, sir.
About it.
So because of your conviction, you lost out on 17 years with your son due to your wrongful incarceration. Would you be willing to talk to us just a little bit about what this has done to both of your lives, or what that's been like?
Yes, that's a very hard subject. For my
you don't have to. Yeah, don't feel obligated to say too much about that if you don't want to.
Yes, I do. I think that people need to understand the impact that a wrongful conviction has with the family. My son was 2 years. He was going to be 2 years old when I got convicted. He was 18 when I came home. So my son grew up without me, and a lot of times, because of my charges, I lost custody of him. I think it was 4 years into my time. And so I remember I had one visit with my son, and he was 4 years old. And he came because of my charges. We weren't able to have contact visits. So we had to see each other through a window. But I remember the week before, my mom told me she was going to come bring my son. And I remember getting on my knees and praying. And I was like, God, please, I just want to hold him just one time. I didn't get to hold him the day that I got my conviction. My son wasn't in the room. So I never got to say goodbye to my baby. And so, so that day that he came to visit, when you go in for a visit, they pull up your name and then your restrictions will come up. Well, it just so happened that the day that he came, my restriction didn't come up. And I had a contact visit with my baby. And if I tell you that was God sent, I got to see him and I was holding him and I hugged him. And I remember that we were talking, we were at the table and he was sitting there and he was counting all the coins. And he was like, Mama, look, we have enough money for us to take the bus ride home so we can all fit. And I'm like, baby, Mama can't go on the bus with you home. She's going to have to stay here a little longer. And he didn't have any understanding about it. And so he was like, well, okay, let me go get you something to drink. So him and my mom go to get me something to drink and I kind of collect myself. And that always, stayed in my mind for years. Well, I never got to see my son after that. That was my last visit. His father took custody of him for when he was 7. And I didn't see him again until he was 18. So during the time that we were separated, my son used to write. And as a matter of fact, this is the only letter I had of him when he wrote me. And I have it framed and I have it by my desk. So every time that I see it, it reminds me of such the blessings that I have today because of the Innocence Project. And the letter says, Dear Mommy, and I miss you. I want to see you again, and I hope you're having a good time. You might see me in your dreams, and I miss you. And it says, I hope you miss me too. As I remember, I remember that you're so pretty, and I am 8 years old now. And he put his little hand on here and he put, I love you. So every time I wrote him, I used to write him letters and I would put my hand and I would tell him, when you miss me, just put your hand there and I'll always be there. And I used to pray every night for that. Well, my son is currently in the military. He's a Marine. He's been enlisted already going on 6 years. I had my first grandchild in December. And about 3 weeks ago was the first time that me and him sat down together. I did a justice healing, and through justice healing, I was able to kind of touch base on some of the feelings and emotions that I've been through, not being able to, be a mother to him. He's my only child, so I didn't know how to be a mother to him because I was away for so long. And him being my only child, I didn't know how to approach him with it without making him feel uncomfortable or causing any emotional, upheaval for him. So finally, 3 weeks ago, we had a talk and he reminded me about that day where he was at that table counting the coins to see if we had enough money to take the bus home. Of course, he didn't understand anything. And he always told me, he says, Mom, he says, today, when I think about everything, he says, I wish things were a whole lot different when you came home, because he still stayed with his father. But he tells me every day, I love you. He'll text me just out of the blue and just tell me that he loves me and that, he hopes that we will be able to build a relationship together and heal in the process. And that's where we're at right now. I told him I didn't want him to have to deal with any of the emotional trauma that he had with me being away and affect him being a father to his 2 children. As I have another grandbaby on the way that'll be due in November. And so I don't want those issues that he hasn't been able to deal with impact his relationship as a father. So right now I'd have to say that A lot of times a wrongful conviction, yeah, we come home and we're able to, live life, but it doesn't make up for those years that you've been away. It doesn't, no amount of money, no amount of anything can make up for those years and all that we've lost in our children's lives. His first walk, his first teeth, everything, his first day of school, his first heartbreak, him going into middle school, going into high school. I missed all his football games, all those things that, he experienced in life that I wasn't able to be a part of and make those memories. I can't ever get those back. The only thing I can do now is be able to make a difference and make those memories now with my grandbabies and with him, with whatever life I have left in me to be able to do that. So it's been hard, and every day, it's a blessing, and every day I try not to take life for granted, and I try to live it to the fullest. And a lot of times I try to share, even if how much, no matter how much the heartbreak it could be, but I want people to understand the impact that wrongful conviction does in people's lives, not only my son, but my mom, my dad. I lost my dad while I was incarcerated. So, it's like a chain reaction. So many people, not only the person convicted, but everyone around you, the impact that it has in their lives and in their futures.
Thank you so much for sharing all that. Did you think maybe it's time to move to audience questions? So while we're getting that situated, was there any last things you wanted to say?
For me?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and you know what? During that time, being gay and coming out, I remember I didn't have any contact with my other co-defendants, but during that time, being gay was so difficult to try to get help from, I would say, from our community, because every time, because of our charges, it's so sensitive that it was hard for anyone to come forward and say, okay, I help you, because it was a child case, because you had so many gay people, women that came out and had kids or had children and didn't want the impact of that to affect their relationship with their children, or anyone to get angry and try to take away their children in the process, if that makes any sense. So it's been very difficult. And I think even today, it's hard when it comes to child cases, because nobody really wants to touch that subject or go forward with it because of the impact that it has in society itself as a family and whole.
Hello? Okay, yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right. First off, thank you so much for sharing that story. Sincerest apologies, really feel for you. But I guess, so I looked into your case a little bit more, and I was really shocked just by the gross negligence the justice system had for your case. And there was information about how there was medical evidence that was just completely disregarded and twisted, and the lawyer actually didn't even properly read that, and they took their words back. So could you speak just a little bit more to how the justice system just completely ran over your case?
And so during the time, with the medical evidence they had, it showed that it was at the third degree, 3 o'clock hymen. And come to find out that it was actually, I guess they took the picture, the light that flashed is what it showed. And whenever we were fighting our case for a reappeal, the Dr. Kellogg had to sign an affidavit saying that, the evidence that they had was not correct. And so during the time, of course, young science kind of does, over the years, they learned, different technology and everything kind of helped with that. But at that time, they didn't want to acknowledge it. And because the crime never happened, there was nothing else they can use for evidence. And so they tried to continue to use that as something that to get the conviction for it. So, and that with that is what they ran with. There's no other explanation that nothing ever happened. And so them having that picture in that light, that's what they used.
Thank you for explaining that. That just really struck me because there was no solid evidence, yet they still had a conviction, which is awful. My final question for you specifically is, how should the justice system be fixed, especially with cases like children's cases or, just people not fitting the accepted heteronormative mold?
I think that, a little more critical thinking of things and taking things further than just, kind of like the big picture. They don't see everything within it. A lot of cases with child cases, it's difficult because of course they're going to believe the child first. And I'm not going to say that abuse doesn't happen because I know that it does, but I think they need to dig more into the case than just that. A lot of, to this day, you have people that are going through divorces and separations, and they use their children to their advantage to say, okay, well, my mommy touched me or my daddy touched me. And then because he doesn't want to be with me or she doesn't want to be with me, and they use the children to their advantage to, try to get custody of them and not recognizing the impact that they have on that the impact that they're having on the children and what the children are having to go through emotionally. It's not fair to put that child through that because a couple is angry. And that's kind of what happened in our case. My brother-in-law had an interest in me and he was married to my sister. And because I refused any advancements, towards me, this was the result of it. Was it fair to my 3 friends? No. But it's what the system believed, and it's what the system went with. And because of that, we lost so much time. But had they dug deeper into that, and not only just the medical evidence, but seeing that this had happened to other people before us, that he had already had charged other people with it, and then even after us, he continued to do it. So if they would just do a little more investigative work and not just stay focused on just a conviction and really search for justice and truth, I think it'll make a big difference.
Hello, is it working? Hello, thank you so much for telling your story and for your strength and being able to share your story. One thing I was wondering was, you knew you were innocent, but others around you must have been, all convinced that you were guilty at a lot of different points. Did you ever feel like you're losing your mind?
No, I don't think I ever felt that way. I was angry at some point. I was, because being in prison and having to deal with those type of charges is difficult. But I don't know, for myself as an innocent person, I had that peace within myself that I knew I didn't do anything wrong. So I could live with myself, like with my inner being, I could be okay. Yes, I was put in a situation like this, and now I have to learn to live with it and deal with it and kind of make it through the time. But because I had peace within myself, knowing that I didn't do anything wrong, I was able to keep a focus on what my purpose was, and that was to prove my innocence.
Thank you.
Hi, thank you so much for sharing things. There's a couple more questions we'd like to ask you, if that's all right with you. One question is, Lexi mentioned a little bit about this, but do you believe that if you had fit the heteronormative white mold, your trial would have gone differently?
Probably. For one, I was gay. For 2, I was Hispanic. For 3, I was poor. And had I been a straight woman, had money, and, probably white, I probably would have had a chance in the system. but I didn't have any of that. And so because I was a minority and everything else, I had everything against me from the get-go.
We're good to go. Thank you. Thank you so much, Liz Ramirez. We love your story. We're so glad to hear from you today. I guess we have time, so I do just want to offer, if there's, just anything else you want to say before we talk to Carlos, feel free.
Well, I know this is a sociology club, and I just would like to say that that you guys, everything that happens in society these days, that the life changing in technology and our lifestyle and everything kind of revolves around what happens within these years that are approaching, with COVID, all these changes that are going on. I hope that that the impact that you guys of change will kind of put also not only these stories that you hear from these women or men with the Innocence Project for wrongful conviction, that you would remember that it can happen to anybody and it can happen to you. So anything that you learn or you go by or share or put forth, always give 100% and always try to put yourself in their shoes and see what kind of impact you can do that way. Because if you were in a situation and you needed help and you were that one person that can make that change, how would you do it? In a society that's always revolving about changing, how would you go about making that change? And when you do, always put 100% into it, because it could be you in that person's shoes. That's all I'd like to share.
Thank you so much. Can we get a round of applause for Liz Ramirez? Carlos, could you unmute yourself?
Yes, here I am.
Hi, while we were reviewing cases, I took a personal special interest in your case, so I'm glad we were able to get you to talk tonight.
Yes.
But I want to say first, I understand that you are a poet, among other things.
I took a poetry class, and so I did write some poetry. I would hesitate to say that I'm a poet. I would probably more identify myself as a mathematician first. I mean, I think I haven't written a poem in such a while, but I've done it. Yes.
Interesting. I mean, yeah, there's a lot of overlap probably between poetry and math. I had a professor once tell me that the reason he doesn't have an affinity for poetry is because he's bad with math. So yeah, with that out of the way, would you please tell your story?
Okay. I apologize a little bit for not being able to speak in too much detail about my case, simply because I'm still in the process of being, we're still kind of fighting the exoneration, and my lawyer almost always advises me to tell less than more. But in general, I was 17 in 1995 when I was convicted of a murder I did not commit. After several hours of police interrogation, I was coerced to make a statement against myself. During trial, I had a lawyer who actually was trying to advise me to plead guilty to 5 years. I did not. I took a different route. We hired another lawyer and went to trial and wound up convicted and spent 25 years of my life in prison. Despite my best efforts, I had to go to the parole board fight to get paroled while still maintaining my innocence. Luckily, I was able to do that. I got off parole. I went home in 2017. I then spent another 3 years on parole. In New York State, the way life parole works is that you spend 3 years on parole, then you have an evaluation. And if the parole board deems it necessary, they will release you from parole early. And if not, you have to wait another 2 years. And if not, again, you have to wait at the 10-year mark. Luckily, after 3 years on parole, I was discharged and have been discharged for over a year and a half.
So I understand you have a relationship with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Is that right?
No.
No? Okay. Sorry, my talking points must have been off. Was there anything while you were incarcerated that helped keep your spirits up?
I think for me, there was something a little bit different than what I hear many other exonerees talk about. People often say that, you know, you should live your life day to day and kind of worry about tomorrow and different when it gets there. But I think there's a difference between living day to day and surviving day to day. And I think I took it to that point where what I did was I survived day to day. I did pray for a while, but every time I hoped for something to be different, I would get shot down. And so I learned to become afraid of hope because it hurt too much. And I got to the point where I stopped dreaming about the streets. Even when I dreamt about my family, I would dream of them and me in prison. They would be in prison with me in my dreams. So I actually lived my life just surviving. I didn't look back. I didn't look forward. I just looked at the next step. And I think that at some point, you know, this idea of being afraid of hope affects me today, right? And what I realized when I came home was how much I had been putting Band-Aids on wounds that needed stitches. And I've been taking this time since I've been home to try to heal.
What does exoneration mean to you?
At this point, I'm hoping to learn what it means to me once it's there. Because at this point, I've finished my time. I've done it all. I didn't get saved one day from my sentence. Not even one day of my parole. So right now, exoneration seems like it's all paperwork, right? To clear the names from the paperwork. And that's not to say that it means nothing, because I realize that I've had difficulty in getting jobs because of the paperwork. I've been home 4 years and I haven't had a steady job once. Part-times, temporary jobs. I have a temporary job now. So I don't want to downplay it to say like, oh, the paperwork, it's all it is. It doesn't mean anything. But again, I have this this tense relationship with hope that it's hard for me to look forward to what exoneration is going to mean to me in the future.
That's heartbreaking, and also just just very interesting as well. Well, I understand that you're very interested in voting and the rights of previously incarcerated persons to vote. I think you said once that if we were able to vote, they wouldn't treat us as badly while we were in prison. Could you talk a little bit about that?
So I was granted a parole pardon from the governor of New York in order to vote for the first time. It was several years ago. And it seems to me as though there is a big thought process, at least in the prison that I've come from, where if we actually did have the right to vote, there would be politicians looking to make, right? So politicians tend to grab constituents and make promises to constituents, right?
Yeah.
So you would have at least some politicians who might even wind up going into the prison to campaign, right? And with these politicians and these people of power coming into prisons, I believe that the prison officials would then start realizing that their actions would be watched, right? And so in that sense, once the prison population would get a sense of their power in voting and it exerts it, it might tip the balance a little bit towards helping to mitigate some of the abuse. The fear would be that at some point, the way in which people vote in prison would mirror the way that people vote outside. So you'd have some people who would always vote and some people who wouldn't vote anymore because they become discouraged. But definitely at some point you'd find a balance, but I think that the abuse would probably change in some sense if prisoners had the right to vote.
That's interesting. So you said you think that like it does become a problem if people they just have like you're saying more so like the same people are voting and the same people are not voting, right?
Well, I think that I'm not so sure about like whether it's people. The way I look at people in prison, there are always groups of people that are more politically inclined. They talk about politics more, even though they can't vote. They talk about politics. They talk about what's happening with politicians and the kind of laws that are getting passed. So they talk about that. And I think that class of prisoner would be more inclined to vote and continue voting as time passed. But then there are a class of people in prison who probably aren't so political, and they might vote initially, but then lose interest at some point. And so the way that the regular population has probably a certain percentage of people that just don't vote, you'd probably wind up with something kind of similar in prison eventually. But I think initially, right, the novelty and the ability of hoping for some kind of change in prison conditions will push a lot of people to vote while in prison if they had the right at first.
Even on the outside, in terms of like the non-prisoner population, there are large, amounts of people that choose not to vote. What would you say to those people? Or yeah.
I think it's some like, so there's a part of me that understands the the indifference there is towards voting, right? To some degree, right? You feel like your vote doesn't count. The person that, right? You have a two-party system and you don't like either one, so you don't have a choice. You feels like you don't have a choice. But for someone who lost, right? I remember some novel that I read who said the only people who can truly appreciate freedom are the ones who have lost it. And it's sad because I think that some people would appreciate the freedom to vote if they had lost the freedom to vote. And I vote because it's something that was taken from me and now given back to me, and I appreciate it a lot more now that I can do it. And sure, sometimes it seems like, well, you know what? I don't like anyone. Well, you got to pick somebody. You might as well do it, or else, your voice isn't heard at all. I am also almost, what's the right word here? It seems to me like this last election, a lot more people who probably didn't vote before voted this time because of the high turnout. And my advice, or what I think I would like to see at least, is for that kind of push to vote continues.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that. Can you talk a little bit about Justice Through Code, JTC, and also what about it appealed to you?
Okay, so I earned a bachelor's degree in math while I was in prison, and I came home trying to figure out what to do with the math degree. And there were a lot of different ways, engineering, actuary. I kind of explored a lot of different things. I spoke to a couple of actuaries, and one actuary actually told me that a more efficient use of my time and my math degree would be to become a coder and to take a coding boot camp. And so I explored that a little bit. I was still kind of iffy about what kind of things to do with that. And then somebody from the Innocence Project, one of the staff actually sent me a flyer from Justice Through Code, and I thought to myself, well, I've tried all the other avenues. I might as well try this. I did have some experience with a program called LaTeX when I was in prison that's similar to coding, and I enjoyed it. So I said, let me try this out, because I understand that coding involves a lot of the logic, and I was interested in trying to figure out the machine learning and the math behind that. So it seemed like it just fell on my lap, and the things that people had told me in the past about coding. So it seemed to me at that point that it was the right door to walk through that was open in my path.
How were you able to remain motivated while earning your degree? And also, if you talk a little bit about your passion for math as well.
Okay, so I'll start with my passion for math. When I was in high school, it felt like math was the only thing I was good at. I struggled with the other subjects, but I didn't struggle with math. And so I've been a math person since I was a teenager. And so when I was in prison, I think that being in college turned into a distraction from being in prison, right? And then the fact that or maybe I can tell the story first, right? How I actually wound up in college, all right? Bard College, the Bard Prison Initiative actually came around to the prison I was in Green Haven one year, and a lot of the talk, college is coming back, this and that. So one of my friends who had been in college before he was in prison said, let's do it, let's go for it, let's try it. So at that point, I was getting to the point where I felt like I had nothing better to do. So I went with him. And they set us up in the gymnasium. It was about 120, 130 people in there trying to get a college degree. And the process was they would sit you in there. They gave you 3 prompts to write an essay within a couple of hours. And they were only going to pick 12 people out of the 120. So we got our prompts. We wrote our essays. And when the list came out for interviews, I was not on it. So the next year came around and my friend had left. I decided, let me try again, just for the heck of it. Mind you, I was never a great writer, right? I was a math guy. So I went in there and I tried again, and I didn't make it again. The following year after that, I said, to hell with college. I don't need college. I never wanted to go to college anyway. My mom came to this country without a high school diploma, and she's successful. I don't need a college degree. To hell with them. The following year after that, a person who had already been in college sat me down in the yard and said, why aren't you in college? You seem like a smart guy. And I gave him all the excuses. I don't need college. To hell with them. And he says, well, what are you going to do if you wind up having to go to the parole board and you have nothing to show for your 25 years? Right? He says, look, this is how I wrote my essay. And he gave me some pointers. I left the yard, saw the application, and walked right past it. I didn't want to hell with it. I don't care. I walked past it again later on while I was going to dinner. I didn't care. When I walked back to my cell, I don't really know why, but I grabbed an application, sent it in. And this time, I kind of sat in a corner of that gymnasium all by myself. And I wrote an essay about morality, about what was right and what is wrong. And lo and behold, I wound up in college. They picked my essay. And when I got that acceptance letter, I was afraid. Because I said, I don't know why I did this to myself. I'm gonna fail. But a little voice said, you might as well try. You're there. And when I tried, I realized that the reason I was getting bad grades in school, except math, was because I didn't try hard enough. And I started to get A's in writing, in anthropology, in sociology, in history, not just math. And so I think what motivated me was that I was actually doing something good that wasn't prison. And it distracted me from all the things that I had to live through. Right? It was something to focus on other than surviving.
Before we move to audience questions, is there just anything at all that you would like to say?
I guess the only thing I can say here is that I appreciate the opportunities that people like your college and others can give people who have been wrongly incarcerated to be able to talk a little bit about our experiences, because I think a lot of times I hear people say that what doesn't kill us makes us stronger. And I actually believe that's a falsity. I think it's not true. I think the things that don't kill us sometimes leave us vulnerable. And it's not the hardships, because people forget that when you're fighting against something, you're not the only one giving blows. You're getting hit too. It's not the adversity that makes us stronger. It's the healing afterwards. And I think these kinds of talks helps us heal, because we're getting some things out of from within. And it's the healing that makes us stronger, not the adversity. And so I thank you guys for these opportunities to be able to speak and further my healing.
Thank you. Do we have any audience questions?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right. So first off, I don't know if you can speak on this really, but why do you think that you were wrongly convicted?
I guess I can speak about this in general. I think that in general, I think this is not only true for me, but I think it's true for a lot, is that once the police have their theory, it's difficult for them to move away from that theory. They become people who are looking for confirmation bias, and it's all the evidence just confirms whatever bias they had once they've decided this is the guy. And so for whatever reason, they decided to focus on me, and none of the other evidence that pointed elsewhere became relevant to them.
Okay, I have a question. While pursuing your degree, did you encounter any mentors who guided you along in your path? And if so, how was their impact in your career and life?
I think I had a different levels of mentorship from different, like, people who were staff, of course, certain professors, especially the first professors that I had, like an anthropology professor who was always helpful to me in like essay writing. But the one guy who I can say was a mentor to me in the math realm, his name is Anthony Perez. I think he was, how can I, all right. So my understanding is before I actually got accepted into the Bar Prison Initiative, they did not allow people to get a math degree. All they offered were the liberal arts degrees. And a little band of guys kind of pushed for the math. Anthony was among that little group. He was among the first people who got math degrees in the Bar Prison Initiative. And so he was the one I learned more from math-wise, right? At first. And then afterwards, he was the one who kind of pushed me along to continue in that math realm. When I had to write my senior thesis, it was him who kind of pushed me a little bit further. When I had to give my talk, because I was deathly afraid of talking in front of audiences, I think he was the first. He was in the military, so when I had to give my arguments for my senior project in front of the professors, he is the one who kind of coached me. Tell me about this. Tell me about that. Start again. You're saying too many ums. Start all over again. He drilled me for a week on that speech until I got it right. He would not let me, right? Like he just kept going. And I think to me, that was my first opportunity to speak in front of an audience without being afraid, right? And I remember him being the person who kind of pushed me to be better than I thought I could be.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
I don't know if you can speak on this, but when you were talking about your story, you said you were coerced by the police. Can you speak a little bit on it?
That I was coerced into writing a statement against myself. I'm not sure how much I can say about that.
You don't have to if you don't want to. That's
Right. No, I don't want to. It's really about what I think my lawyer would be comfortable with me saying. I think the one thing I can say about that in general, just like as a policy, not necessarily about me, but about policy in general, right? I was 17, right? I didn't have an adult with me. And in my research into that kind of stuff, right? Having minors write confessions, right? It's not just me, it's in general. That the country as a whole, the weight of a child's signature is almost non-existent when it comes to certain things, right? So if an adult asks a minor to sign an agreement for a credit card, if the child doesn't have a parent with them and he spends all that money, he can't get sued for that money because he's doesn't have the power to, his signature does not hold any weight. Meanwhile, if he signs something that the police make him sign, that signature holds all the weight of the law. And so there seems to be a contradiction on whether or not a minor's signature should be held, right? How much weight should it have? Why is it that a minor can't retract something he signed when it affects his freedom, but he can retract that signature if it's money? That's the one thing that seemed to me like a contradiction in my investigations about signed confessions.
So I have a few questions, and some of them will actually be for both you, Carlos and Liz. But first one for Carlos is, from your experience, especially after bringing up that, you know, you were a minor and there was no adult there, and how, you know, prison life was, can you speak on how you feel that the justice system, or even the process of taking in like a suspect, how that should be changed?
I think that some of the ideas I've heard make sense. Having video of the interrogation from the moment they start asking questions would be helpful in order to see whether or not a confession is coerced or not. I think having an adult with a minor is also helpful. In New York, I think there was a point in time, especially in the 90s, where a lot of states treated, depending on the kind of charge that they were being arrested for, they were treated as adults automatically. So I think that there's room for reform in that sense as well. And I think a lot of, trying to see, I think those are the major ones that I think would probably help out. I think the biggest one being the recording of the interrogation, not just because a lot of police also, they used to film the confession, right? The point in which, after all of the interrogation, the suspect is now telling the story. How about the whole process on how you got there?
Thank you. I completely agree. It's ludicrous that isn't already in place. So my second question, which is for both of you, and you don't have to talk about it, but while you were serving this time that you shouldn't have been, were you treated inhumanely? And if you were, did it like impact you almost a little bit more because you are innocent?
I think as my experience was that I did my best to hold my head down in some ways and try to make as little noise as possible. I avoided going to the box. I didn't get into too many fights. I didn't get it right. So you know, I'm 5'4", and I weighed 115 pounds when I got arrested. So I was a really small guy. So I did my best to kind of find a couple of guys who were pretty good guys and try to stay in the shadows and not get noticed as much as I could and just survive. So I would say I probably avoided a lot of the inhumanity, but that doesn't mean that I didn't experience things like I was in the middle of a riot, right? Wrong place, wrong time, got gassed in the face. I, I watched people get stabbed in the chest, in the neck, right? Like, those things do count as inhumane to actually have to watch this stuff. But luckily, I avoided, I think, a great many of more inhumane things that I can say I witnessed or heard of other people going through.
For myself, I would have to say that at a time where, because of my charges, when I was first at the county, we had an officer that paid inmates. That whenever I went to the shower, they had some shanks and went to jump me in the shower and try to stab me. But thank God that another inmate intervened, and she was doing a lot of time and stopped the two women that went to the shower to try to stab me at the time. Because of my charges, it was very difficult. There was a lot of times where, people will call you a child molester and, call you names and all kinds of things. So just like Carlos, I try to stay out of all of that, but it's kind of hard whenever it's directed at you. But, you see so much. It's not easy to kind of forget the things that you see and how people are being treated at times. Being incarcerated, you see a lot of elderly people as well. And in there, they try to keep you to, kind of be unemotional and not kind of help people. Because in Texas, if you try to help another individual, they can charge you with a sex case. If you go to try to help somebody up, they can say that you're touching them inappropriately and charge you with the sex case, saying that you tried to hug them or do something of that sort. So you have to be very careful in prison with doing things like that. And so anything that you try to do to help someone else was just not tolerated. But because of my charges, I did face a lot of that. And I saw so much in there that to this day, I still keep in contact with a lot of inmates that are incarcerated. And I do try, we didn't have water. We didn't have AC in the prison. When it was really cold outside, sometimes we didn't have but a blanket, if that. And some of us, they would take our blankets from us. So there was just so many things that happened that society doesn't see unless, someone like ourselves come out and say, hey, there are no blankets, there is no heating, if not, you guys wouldn't know. But yeah, there was so much that, you go through, and it doesn't matter how many years you've been out, you can never take those thoughts and those experiences that you had over the years and just act like it never happened. Those things will always stay with you and always impact your life. And I think it builds your character as well. Everything that you've been through builds who you are today and gives you the strength to survive out here in a society that's grown over the years, from the time that, I left in 97 to 2013.
Wow. Thank you, because those are the things that I feel the public does not know about. Just like the sheer number of atrocities that are committed in prisons, because these people are humans. That's just awful. But, kind of going off of that, and Carlos brought this up, is that if politicians were to actually come into the prisons and pay more attention, then things would, would change. But do you feel as if our current political climate, or do we have enough activists for this topic? Because there needs to be massive change within the prison system and within the justice system as well. Do you feel that there's enough being done right now? For either one of you?
For me, I don't think so. I think that if I was looking at Carlos's point, like he says, if we were voters, because I've been, since I'm an exoneree, I'm able to vote. People don't think that one vote can make the difference. And no one, politics is so hard, but if people, the politicians went in there and saw what really went on in the prisons, and politics are talked so much in prison, because you got to remember, laws have to be passed in order for us to regain our freedom, to make parole, to do this, to do that. The politicians that are out here are what makes the laws into our system that convict us, that send us to where we need to go. People that had drug cases were in there for 50, 60 years, which should have been a misdemeanor, but they lost all their life. Everyone makes mistakes, but still, I think those are harsh punishments that people have. And those are the changes that need to be done for certain things. But at the same time, I think it's, I went to a Democratic Party just recently, and, sitting there and listening to all the conversations, and then me being an exoneree, that, them talking to me and say, you know what, I remember what happened to you in the 90s, and, this happened. And I'm like, so if it was that same situation done today, what would you do different, is what I asked the DA's office, someone that used to work for the DA's office. And they were like, well, I think we would have people more accountable. Okay, so if you feel that making the prosecutors accountable, interrogations, differently, just like the recordings, and changing these things, then maybe we can have some reform in our system. But we need more people to speak out about it and put those laws into effect, and bring them out to the court, so that they can, fight for that. But a lot of times it's just their opinion, and then they kind of just share it in the group, but don't take that step forward and move forward with it into, Supreme Courts and the courts where they need to be. I know with the Innocence Project, there was several times that we've gone up there and testified for different laws to be passed, because it not only affects, the wrongful conviction, but it affects our justice system and our right to be able to have a fair trial. We have prosecutors that are out there that are just trying to become judges, just trying to get another conviction under their belt, and, lying, hiding evidence, lying with evidence, and doing all these things. Then what is our system based on? Taking that next step, or really taking that oath to, serve and really, truth and justice. That's what you take the oath for justice, for the truth. But if you don't take that oath and take it seriously, and it's just something you're doing just because it's a career, then you're in the wrong field. You're not trying to make that change.
For me, I think that given the political climate, I think there's too many other issues that are being spoken about for it to come to this idea, right? From coronavirus to the Green New Deal, from stimulus and all that. Like, all of that is taking all the attention. So I don't see it changing. But voting, I think, for people in prison and people who come home on parole have two different realms. I can see, right? People who come home from prison, a lot of them, whether they're on parole or not, lose their right to vote, right? They lose their right to vote once they're convicted, and they don't gain it back when they get released. And so at some level, you come home, you're on parole, you start working, you're paying your taxes, you know, one of the mantras that started this country was no taxation without representation. So you're taxing these people, me, right? You're taxing me, I'm on parole, you're taxing me, but I can't vote, right? And on the other side, people in prison aren't being taxed at all. But there's a different animal there, right? Where people in prison, right? If you look at the 13th Amendment, under the Constitution are slaves, because the 13th Amendment says there should be no slavery except for the commission of a crime. So under that interpretation, those in prison are slaves, right? And so I think from that standpoint, the 13th Amendment probably should be re-examined and amended to say that there should be no slaves, period. Right? And perhaps at that point, the people in prison can regain their citizenship as opposed to losing it. Right? But that kind of a conversation isn't being had almost nowhere in the public realm. So I think at this point, with this whole political climate where we're like MAGA people versus non-MAGA people, vaxxers, anti-vaxxers, like that's not even in the realm of entering the conversation. So, but it would be if people just continue to keep talking about it and start these conversations, that it will eventually get there once all of this other stuff starts dying down.
Thank you. And honestly, that's a perspective that I've never even heard of with the 13th Amendment and, being classified as slaves. And I think that that's a really big issue, is that just lack of education. There is seriously no education on what happens in the prison system or just the justice system, period, really, for average Americans. But that does kind of lead into the final question, which you both touched on already, is how can we as the general public help exonerees and help you? How do we help share your story? How do we help educate the public on this topic and hopefully, make an impact, or at least push legislators to actually do something? How would you both like us to do that?
I guess in some ways these kinds of forums that allowed for this space, you guys are going to live stream this at some point or put it out there for us, for people to hear. I think having conversations with people that are good places to start. I guess the other places that we can get to is that once college kids enter the workforce and they start talking to people who are their coworkers and people who are people who they meet on the streets, these are the things that these kinds of things get talked about among people that know you, right, is a great help, as well as these kind of public. I don't think it's one or the other. I think it's a combination of both as things go. And then as there's a lot more public discussion, ideas of changes come about. I think this is where ideas for change kind of, the seeds of those kinds of changes kind of start up with everyday conversations. And as those everyday conversations, those ideas of change flourish into the public realm.
Yeah, I'd have to agree with that. I think on talks like these, where you guys are educated yourselves and sharing and learning from both Carlos and myself, and able to go out and share, like, hey, you know what? We talked about this today in your little group of friends, and then you go home and speak to your parents or someone, and it's just like a kind of a chain reaction, a domino effect. It just keeps going, and sometimes you don't know who you're talking to, and it may have an impact, or it may, they have some kind of relation to the situation. And I think that, in events like this, the doors are being opened, and sharing that, I think it makes a difference, and it just goes forward from there. Because, word of mouth from anyone, if you speak it and that seed is planted, it's just like anything else in life, you kind of just put it there and then see where it grows and where it goes out to, where the air blows it, where it lands, and it can flourish from there.
Hi, I know Liz mentioned earlier that like a website called Write a Prisoner. I was wondering if those kinds of websites are helpful to you guys, because I've participated in Write a Prisoner before, and the person that I wrote was also in Texas, and he said that helped him personally. But I was wondering if more people should participate in those kind of things.
Yes, I mean, it's good. It's a good, a lot of people need pen pals in there. You just have to be careful, but I think that it's good for people that are incarcerated to be able to have that connection. A lot of them don't have family, they get incarcerated, their family kind of just stops, visiting or stops writing. And being incarcerated, you look forward to that mail. You look forward to that card, just to have that connection from someone outside. And it kind of helps you deal with it. I know Carlos says, every day was to survive. And it's like that for a lot of people, every day, you made it through one day. You have, this long sentence, and, every day, okay, I made it here. There's one day down. There's another day down. And a lot of times having that impact, you never know. You have a good pen pal, someone that will encourage you, to do better and to look, and to do better for yourself in there, to educate yourself for work. A lot of times for myself, I wasn't able to go to school. I had a 37.5-year sentence, and because of my time, I wasn't able to go to school. I didn't have the chance to do that. I was considered, low priority. So if I hadn't had the job at the print shop or my pen pals, I don't know how I would have been able to pass my time during my incarceration. So I think that, a lot of times having a pen pal does help a great deal.
Yeah, I think like Liz said, sometimes there is a way to be, you can't, it's hard to just say, yeah, right, we should just write all prisoners. Sometimes, there are good people who've done bad things in prison, but there's also bad people who probably should be held accountable for what they're doing and are not in the right place to change when you write them, right? I think most people in prison have the ability to change, but not everybody is at that point at the same time, right? I've met plenty of people who, when I originally met them, were animals, right? They actually behaved like animals. And then I saw them again 10 to 15 years later, and they were completely different people, right? So it's not about they're either animals or not. It's not everybody's at the same place at the right time, right? And so you have to be careful who and when you write, but definitely having some type of connection, a pen pal or something in the outside can definitely help people. And sometimes it might even help somebody get from point A to point B, right? It's just that it's tricky, and if as long as you're careful, definitely having somebody to write to, somebody to be able to say things to that you might not be able to say to other people in prison is an outlet of an avenue to kind of get things off your chest and to just, because there were points in my incarceration where I didn't write anybody, right? The only connection I had was calling my mom, right? And my mom would not write me letters because she said she couldn't do it. She said, just call me. I can't write you letters. It's too emotional for me. So there were points when I got no letters from anyone, just calls to my mom. And those were difficult times, right? Because now it was just a focus on this, on what's going on, right? And so that's why the transition into college versus I don't care if anyone's not writing me, I have college, right? So definitely writing a prisoner is an outlet for most people to be able to escape prison mentally. And I think it's helpful for a lot of prisoners.
So how do you recommend staying safe while like trying to make an impact on somebody, like writing them? And because you said you have to be careful, so how would you guys recommend like staying safe while being able to make that impact on those prisoners?
I think, like personally, I think the being careful part is understanding, right? Like, the way in which, right? There's when we talk to people, right? It's easy to like see the body language and say, yo, this guy or this person is being a little rough, or is trying something, is trying to manipulate me, wants me to send them money, or wants me to do this, do that, right? That's what we mean by being careful. Where you're like, I'm trying to write you as a friend, but now you're doing something a little bit, right? Like, why are you writing this? What's going on, right? So in that sense, it's about being a critical thinker in when you read what they're doing, what they're writing to you, right? So when you're in college, you read a text and you're being a critical reader in order to say, what do these people mean when they're writing this philosophy? The idea here is to do the same thing with their letters, right? To be able to kind of decipher what are they writing in between the lines sometimes. Not so much always being too critical where you're like reading too much into it, but being aware, I think, is what you have to do from that standpoint, right? And then kind of gauging your comfortability with what they're writing, right? And then setting those boundaries. Say, listen, you're saying this to me, I'm uncomfortable. And then if it's just not working out, then you stop. But that's kind of like what I think is kind of like kind of be critical about what they're saying when they're writing.
Yeah, and in my opinion, I would say platonic. Being incarcerated, you're away from society, right? So you're in there and like we're all bottled up with all these emotions and people need that outlet, right? Like he's saying. And so if I write you and I'm like, hey, Irene, this is my day. This is how I'm going. Make sure that, they're not trying to take you for your money. Don't put too much of your personal, like your private, you can talk, but keep it like safe with that. You don't want, because you don't know who you're really writing, for one. You kind of, do as they write, because I mean, you have good people, you have bad people, but that's going to be your judgment. But like you said, the critical thinking, don't put yourself in a situation where an individual be writing you and then becomes all sexual. I mean, bottom line, don't let them be, sexual with you to where then you're feeling uncomfortable or making advances and then trying to take your money and things like that. If you want to be straightforward with the pen pal and say, hey, you know what? I know how hard it is, to do time. And, I just want, to be able to have a correspondence with you, someone, to write to if you need to, and just be a friend, I would have to say in that avenue, and then you can see from there if you're comfortable from that standpoint, but because you have people that are incarcerated and, that will tell you anything you want to know to try to, my family don't send me money, I don't have this, because you do have people that don't have the help. And they, want you to send them money, want you to do this, and just tell them, I'm just here to correspond with you. And then that it'll be an honest correspondence. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thank you. So my name is Brett. I'm in the sociology club, and for one of my classes, I'm actually doing a survey about prison exoneree stigmas. And I guess you guys touched on both, like a lot of these issues about like, Carlos, you talked about how hard it is to maintain a job. Obviously, we both know like family members and friends may treat you guys different. I guess, if anything, I want to know, and as much as you guys are willing to share, how do you not necessarily make sense of that, but like, how do you deal with that as now that you're in the process of being exonerated, or that you already are exonerated? How does that, like, how do you grapple with that reality?
Liz, you want to go first? Or...
You can go first.
Okay. I think that very much at first, it was a big struggle, right? A lot of all of my cousins were born after I was arrested. And now they're adults, right? And so I found myself in a position where they would gather together, we would come together, and they were having conversations, and I felt out of place because they were inside jokes that they knew understood, inside conversation they were already privy to, but none of them felt the need to say, oh, Carlos doesn't understand. They don't get it, right? I have a niece who at her graduation party once told one of her friends, oh, do you remember my uncle, Joe? Remember when we were growing up? He's coming up from Florida. I was standing right next to her, and at no point did she say, oh, by the way, this is my uncle. You never met him before. Right? So it felt like, who am I in this family? Right? I had big arguments with my sister at some point. My mom, who would treat me still like a 17-year-old, even though it was 42, right? And the clashes we had, right? All of that is like something that I had to work with and felt lonely about, right? Where I felt like I'm surrounded by people and nobody gets me. Nobody understands who I am, right? And in the beginning, there came a point where I sat in my room and cried for hours, all alone, right? Just from the sheer loneliness. And it got to the point where I don't understand where it came from, but I actually had the thought that shit was easier in prison. And it made me even cry harder because I would even think something like that. right? And I actually had to go to therapy, and I spent a couple of years in therapy behind all of this stuff. And, you know, there is, the bad part is that I had to actually go through all of that I had to fall so deep. But at the very least, at this point, I have a better relationship with my mom. I have a better relationship with my sister, right? But it took all of that back and forth. It took all of that struggle for us to go through. And yet it's still not perfect. I still have to kind of push back sometimes against my mom, push back a little bit on my sister, right? My sister was 6 years old when I got arrested. I come home, she's 30 something with a kid, right? Like, I'm an adult and you weren't around. And I just still like, you were 6. Why don't you respect me? Right? Like that. But then I'm like, wait a minute. She's a grown woman. Right? All of that stuff just kind of like, and it's sudden because you're not home one day, you're home the next.
Yeah, that's crazy because exactly the way he kind of described it is exactly how it happens. You know, you come home and your family talking about movies, TV shows, and you're like, I can't talk about it because I don't know. I've never seen it. I can't relate. And the conversation is so minimal because all you've known is, you know, for me was 17 years of prison. You know, you see magazines, you do all of this, but to come home and have that connection, it's difficult. You know, I remember when I first came home, I was out on bond before I got exonerated. And every day I wondered, is today the day that's going to change? Am I going to have to go back to prison and finish out my time? Or am I going to, you know, am I going to be found innocent and be able to start my life again? So every day was a challenge for me. And I remember when I was working the line and everybody was talking and like, hey, Liz, you remember this? You remember that? And I'm like, no, I don't. Well, where you been? You've been gone, you know, where you been? You ain't heard about it. Everybody talks about that. Everybody's been there, but I hadn't been. And I remember I would spend hours in my room just by myself because I was so used to that. And I would collect my thoughts and I'm like, God, why do I feel so like out of place? And that's what I think a lot of exonerees, we have that connection because we know the feeling of that loneliness, even though you're in this big room with 100 people. And it's just like, it's just you because you can't have, it's hard to have that relation or that, you know, conversation because you've been gone for so long. And it's not until now, like Carlos had said, you know, the counseling and the talking through it, you know, with our families, with our children, you know, that they're able to understand where we're coming from. But it's not until you actually share with them, like, hey, you know, I like my baby sister, you know, she was like, you know, what's wrong with you? And I'm like, I just feel so uncomfortable. I feel like I don't have anything to talk about. I can't relate to you guys. And it makes me feel, you know, weird. And I don't know what to do. You know, I used to be, when I would go to a clothing store, went to go buy some clothes. This is just a story that happened to me. And it started getting really busy. And I hadn't been in San Antonio in 17 years. So, it had changed for so much. And I went into the dressing room to change. And then I came out looking for her. And I couldn't find my sister. So I was like kind of freaking out a little bit. And I was like, well, where is she? I mean, I went to the front door. I couldn't find her. I didn't know really where I was at because I hadn't been to that side of town. And so I was like, I started panicking because I didn't know what to do. I didn't know my way home because I hadn't been to that side of town and I wasn't driving. Everybody was driving me around in San Antonio. And so I started crying. And when she saw me, she was like, what's wrong with you? And I was like, just don't leave me. You know, I started, don't leave me. I'm scared. I don't know where I'm at. And then you wonder if people know that you've been in prison. I mean, nobody probably even knows, but you feel that way, that everyone is looking because you've been away for so long. And those are the things that, I had to learn emotionally to deal with, in my working environment, with my family and just, around anyone, and it's hard. Those are the things that you have to come out to heal, to, come back into society with just even learning to use a phone. I mean, I don't know, like for Carlos, how hard it was, but I remember I had a flip phone and I kept hanging up on everybody because I didn't know how to use it. And it was crazy because they didn't even have cell phones when I got incarcerated. So I didn't know how to use it. And then I would run my debit card the wrong way before they had the little chip thing. And those little things that I didn't know how to do were the most frustrating. We can't use internet and stuff in prison. So learning how to send emails and do this and do that. I mean, to this day, I'm still learning. I go to college right now for my paralegal. I'm trying to get my paralegal certificate, and I'm in this classroom with like 19, 20, 30-year-olds. And here I am, 47 years old, back into a school and trying to learn all these things. And these kids are quick on their computers and I'm not. I'm still learning. So it's like taking baby steps as the years go by and you can never really catch up.
Yeah, I think there's like this, like, just to like kind of add on to something that they said, where like I remember going someplace and asking about, because I was trying to get my driver's license, and I asked this person in the public library about where to get where I could take the 6-hour driving course. And it's like, oh, you got to go over here and over there. And I was like, I'm trying to remember because this is the town I grew up in, and I'm trying to think. And she says, you're new around here. I says, no, I grew up here. I just haven't been here for 25 years. And she's, the look on her face is like, oh, it's like, do you know when the King Cullen used to be? Yeah, right. And I remember talking to someone when I was walking my mother's dog, and she's like, she was out on the street, and she says, I've never seen you here before. I said, well, I grew up around here, but I have, I went away for a little bit. Oh, where did you go? It's like, oh, geez, what do I say? Right? Like, and she's an older lady. She's 7 years old. I don't want to tell her, oh, I went to prison. Like, and it makes you uncomfortable to say, I don't have no answers for these people. Right? And so then I just said, oh, I used to live upstate. Right? And when my sister, this is one of the biggest arguments I got to my sister with, because when she heard about that, and she says, why did you tell that lady that you went to prison? She says, I didn't say I went to prison. I said I lived upstate. It's the same thing. You feel like you're proud of being in prison. I says, no, I just don't have any answers. Right? And so this is like the kind of thing like that we would clash on. Right? Because she felt like all I wanted to talk about was I was in prison. When it says, why should I have to lie about where I was when I don't have any other answers for them? Right? And so this, I mean, these kinds of things that they seem small, right? One of my other sisters says, well, the weight is off your shoulders, but I still feel the effects of the weight. Right? I still feel these effects. Right? I'm still sore from the weight on my shoulder. I still have the indentations on my shoulder from this. It's not as easy as saying the weight's off. It wasn't 6 months. It was 25 years. Doesn't go away in 2 months. That's kind of like the biggest, like these big arguments, like the little habits that I still have that my sisters still say, you've been home 4 years already. Why do you keep doing that? Yeah, get rid of a habit that I was doing for 25 years in 4. Come on, like, right? But they don't, because they haven't been there.
Yeah, exactly. They don't have that understanding. It's been 7 years for me, and I still, a lot of times when I need to collect myself, I lock myself in my room because that's where I find my peace. That's where I can like get my thoughts together. Because before it was one cubicle or one cell, And so, and like you said, 25 years, 17 years, I mean, they tell you when to eat, when to do everything. It was a routine for years. It becomes a habit. And so it's difficult to come home and then try to take all of that out, just change your whole life and readjust in just 4 years, 7 years, and 10 years. Sometimes I don't even know we ever can. I know there's other exonerees that still go through some issues now, but those are the things that as exonerees, we're able to, or even prisoners, we're able to relate with, and we know the sense of being alone, the sense of being lost, and those things that, we have to deal emotionally and mentally, that people feel like we should be, hey, you're home now, live life. It's not that easy. How do you live life when it's been taken from you for so long? How do you take that step again? How do you got to put one foot in front of the other, but you're learning again, you're learning to walk again in a society that's changed in 25 years and 17 years. We grew up in prison, 19, 17. I mean, we grew up in there. We didn't get to live our life in our 20s and our 30s. We came home in our 40s, and by then society feels you should have already lived it, but we're just starting to live it. So it's hard to take those steps and relearn again.
I think we're just about out of time here in Farber Hall. But I just wanted to thank you guys so much for sharing with us. And also if we could get like one last round of applause for, mother, student, Liz Ramirez, gentleman, scholar, future exoneree, Carlos Sanchez.
And I apologize. I know you said one last round of applause. Can I get all the members of the Sociology Club up here, please? Front and center. John,
Okay.
over here. Over here. Front and center. Let me hide behind the podium. I hope that everyone really found a lot of value in what we shared this evening. Can I ask y'all to give a round of applause for our members in the Sociology Club for helping to get this together?